Hi, everyone. Oh, no. You beat me to it. Yasin, Marek, you beat me to it. Hi. Hi, everyone. Come on in. Come, take a seat. Come, take a seat. How are you all? How are you all? Good. Good. Very well. Thank you for asking. I'm also well. Good stuff. Day 10. Can you believe it? Day 10. Typing it in. I can't believe it. I can't believe it at all. How many sessions have you been to? How many sessions have you been to? That's my question. That's what I want to know. Keep the emojis. Keep the emojis. I love the emojis. They make me feel nice. Very nice. Very nice. The whole thing. I'm not even going to put a number. I'm going to say everything. Awesome. Bit bittersweet, isn't it? Bit bittersweet that it's the last one. Yeah. Sadly, just three, Maria. Well, if you registered for the whole thing, you will see that in your virtual goodie bag, you've got the recordings from all of them. So you will be able to see that. You can still watch back at your own time, in your own time, at your leisure, at leisure. Some phrase. Good stuff. Hi, Adriana. How does it feel not to hear our voices, not to see our faces? Well, do you know what? I'm kind of used to it. I feel it. When people put words in the chat box, I feel the enthusiasm and the excitement because people put things like exclamation marks and the emojis and nice words. And I feel it. I feel it. That's how. That's how it feels. Sometimes I kind of wish we were all in the same room together. It would be nice, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be great if we were just in a room together somewhere? Maybe we should do a face-to-face Global Teachers Festival sometime. That sounds very expensive for everybody. Since day two and not received the goodie bags, Letitia. That's no good. You haven't received the goodie bags. I would check your junk first, your junk mail, because they almost always go there. Mine don't actually, because I open it every time, and so it recognizes Macmillan, and it knows that I want to open them. If you're not getting them, definitely not in your junk folder or your spam. Email us at eltwebinars@macmillaneducation.com. Macmillaneducation.com. Good stuff. Okay, I've got a few things to say. This is going to be an amazing session for you. You are about to get your mind absolutely blown. There are three sessions today. I've already watched them because they did the session this morning, and they're about to repeat the session now. So I've seen the three of them, and they are absolutely incredible. You're about to get insights into three different worlds that you will never forget. So I'm going to share my screen. Doopy doopy doopy. There we go. And there it is. You can see it, I think. Right. Can't wait, Constantina, as well. Yes, I can't wait either. Actually, while you are listening to me, if you want to type something, if your fingers are burning or itching, you kind of want to say something, say, give me an adjective to describe your feeling. Just how do you feel? Tell me how you feel. What is the feeling that you've got in here right now? Expectant. That's a good start. Blessed, relaxed, wonderful, curious. Love it. Keep it going. I'm going to rabbit on for a minute, but please keep that going. These are our three talks today. That's right. Three talks, three extraordinary talks. I hope I'm not putting pressure on the speakers here, but I hope they know that they're brilliant and you're just about to see some really great talks. I can't wait for you to see it. Claire Hart will be kicking things off, followed by Boelo van der Poel and Wiktoria Allan. She'll be finishing things off a bit later. This is quite a large session today. We're finishing, so I would allow at least 2 hours for the session today. It won't be finished in an hour. We usually finish in a sort of an hour and a half, but there are three talks. They are all 30 minutes, about 30 minutes each. So it's going to go on at least 2 hours in total. So I'll definitely allow for that. if you need to clear something or let somebody know something. I don't know. Anyway, those are our 3 talks coming up. As I mentioned, you're going to get an email with your. I didn't mention it, but I'm going to mention it. You're going to get an email with 2 links. The first one is to a certificate with your name on it. And the second one is going to be to your virtual goodie bag. You're going to get your virtual goodie bag later today. We're going to give it to you in session, as always, with your gift. And you're also going to get it by email. And when we send it by email, by that point, we will have sorted out the recordings and any slides that we're sharing. We would have put that on the goodie bag by that point. So when we send it by email, it's sort of the whole thing. But today, you're at least getting our gift. You can walk away with that. And today, you're going to love it. It's a very cool gift today. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. Claire Hart. I can see you. They can't see you just yet. Yes, there you are.
Okay. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Very good.
Big day today. 3 sessions.
Busy day.
Yeah. Busy day. Thank you so much for joining us here, Claire. You have been in ELT for 20 years. Why did you start teaching English as a foreign language?
I think it was actually just because I personally enjoyed learning languages so much. And
Okay.
I just loved the experience of language learning. So I wanted to kind of make that into a career and hopefully share that love of learning languages with other people.
What has been your favorite language to learn?
Good question.
Thank you.
I think I've learned quite a lot of languages. I personally really love French. French was actually the first language that I ever learned. And French always
Okay.
has a special place in my heart. I have a lot of love for French.
Does it take you back to school? You think of learning French? It takes me back to school. It takes me back to the French
Yes,
classroom.
yes. And I also lived in France for a while when I was young and in the prime of my life. So maybe it
Really?
takes me
Oh,
back to that
great.
time as well.
Oh, amazing. That's
Yeah.
cool. Whereabouts in France were you living?
In Rennes, in Brittany, so
Okay.
in the west of France. Yeah.
Very cool.
Hmm.
Nice. Okay, Claire, I think it's about time I hand over, if that's okay.
Sure.
Um, be nice to them. They're a lovely lot. See you in
I'm
about
sure.
half an hour.
Okay, thank you, Will. Um, okay, just bear with me one moment. Get the old slides working here. Okay, so yeah, as Will said, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or this morning or maybe this evening, wherever you are. I am in Germany, so for me it's the afternoon. And yeah, as Will said, also we have an excellent program of talks on the topic of neurodiversity today. And I'm going to kick us off by giving you a little bit of an introduction into neurodiversity in general, what it is, um, the different kind of types of neurodiversity that exist, and also look a little bit at inclusion. What is inclusion in the context of education? Why is it important? And then after that, I'm going to look at autism in particular, focus on that, and look at what autistic people are like, basically. Hopefully bust some myths which you may have heard about autistic people, and look at how we can include autistic students in the classroom, in any lesson, really, any, whether it's language learning or any subject that they're learning, it doesn't matter. Okay. So let's start. As you can see, the title of my talk is Increasing Accessibility for Neurodiverse Students in the Classroom. So that's going to be the focus. How can we increase or improve neurodiverse students' access to learning, essentially? And before we start properly, I should just mention that when I'm talking about neurodiversity, I am talking about it from the perspective of someone who has lived experience of it, because I have autism and ADHD. So I'm an ADHD, you can call it. Some people call it. I also have a son who's 8 years old who also has autism and ADHD. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about it from a perspective of my own experience, and from the experience of being a parent to a child who's neurodiverse. And of course, my experience as a teacher comes in all on top of that too. So just so you know, I think it's important to point that out at the start. Okay, so let's get going. What is neurodiversity? So it's probably a word that you've heard often, but you may not be sure exactly what it is. In some ways, it's kind of become fashionable lately. You may have heard people talking about it on social media or in the news or just from colleagues. So, of course, the neuro comes from neurological, connected to the brain, and diversity, of course, means a range of differences. So, it recognizes the range of differences in brain function. Okay, so the idea is not to say, you are bad because your brain is functioning differently. It's just to say there are lots of different ways in which the brain works, and trying to give these different ways a degree of parity with each other. So the ways in which the brains of neurodiverse people function differently is in terms of sensory processing, so how they experience sensory input, sights, sounds, smells, etc. How it affects their motor abilities, so their ability to use their hands, their bodies. How it affects their cognition, so thinking, learning, remembering, and their focus, so their concentration, and their social comfort. So by social comfort, I mean how comfortable people feel in different situations. So as you can see, neurodiversity affects a lot of different aspects of your life. So these are going to be things that you're going to be dealing with every day. Every day, you're going to have sensory input. Every day, you're going to be thinking. Every day, you're probably going to be in social situations. Every day, you're going to be using your hands, right? So this is why neurodiversity really affects people's lives in a significant way. Now, a little bit of science. It'll only be short, I promise. So within this range of differences that is neurodiversity, doctors, psychologists have identified certain tendencies, so kind of groups of characteristics. So there are certain tendencies in behavior and cognition. And then the identification of these tendencies has led to medical diagnoses for different types of neurodiversity. Autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and dyslexia. So you're going to have an expert on each of these three types of neurodiversity talking to you today. So it's worth pointing out that autism spectrum disorder is the medical diagnosis. When we're talking about it generally, we prefer to use the term autism, just autism. And of course, words like disorder obviously have a negative meaning, very negative. So many people prefer to replace disorder with condition, which is more neutral. Okay, so you have to be a little bit careful with the terminology you use here, right? So as not to offend anyone. Terminology is important. But everyone will have different perspectives on what terminology they want to use for themselves. So it is okay to say an autistic person, I am autistic. But some people say I don't like that, because if you're saying I'm an autistic person, I'm autistic, you are saying that that person is solely or overwhelmingly characterized by their autism. And some people say, no, I don't see myself in that way. I'm not that characterized by my autism. Um, I would prefer to be described as a person with autism. So the autism is like my handbag, which I carry with me. So it's with me, but it's not part of me. It's just I'm a person with autism. Some people prefer that definition. Some people prefer, again, even more distance between the person and the condition. And those people prefer to say a person who lives with autism. And of course, the lives with is now a kind of preferred terminology for talking about any kind of difference. It shows that compassion, and also that idea of the condition is not you, it's something that you have to deal with. Okay. That you do deal with. You know, it also has a positive meaning of, you know, you do deal with it. Personally, I prefer the terminology an autistic person. I don't mind being characterized in that way. I don't think that autism characterizes who I am to a dominant degree, even if I use that terminology. So that would be my preference. Okay. So having talked a little bit about what neurodiversity is, I was wondering how many of you have taught neurodiverse students up to now. So if you could bring up my poll, please, Evelina, that would be great. Thank you. So as you can see here, the poll question is, how many of the students you've taught were neurodiverse? And I have given some options because we have to have options. The majority of them, around half of them, 10 to 20% of them, hardly any of them, so less than 10%, or none of them. So I wonder, what does your experience of students with neurodiversity mean? So I'll give you about 20 seconds to input your answer to the question there. And then we'll see what results we have.
I'm here, Claire, if you want me to share any results with you.
Yes, please do.
So we've got about 5% say the majority of them, around 8% say around half, 40% of the result of the people that answered says 10 to 20%, 40% hardly any of them, and 7% say none of them.
Okay, so most people are going for around 20 to 5%.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. Probably that your percentage may depend on how long you've been teaching, but okay, great. We'll go back to this at the end of the talk and see if there are any changes to your perspective. Okay. Thank you. Or let's disappear that. Great. Just like magic. Okay, great. So we know what neurodiversity is, and we've talked about autism, but why? I mean, you know, Vicky and Boelo and I today are going to be talking a lot about what can we do to include neurodiverse students, strategies and tips and so on. But the question is, why is inclusion important? Okay. And unfortunately, whisper it, but not all teachers seem to believe that inclusion is important. I'm sure that doesn't apply to any of you here because you've come to this session. But I think it's really important to just reiterate that it is important because you're teaching the whole class, not just some of the students, or at least you should be. That's what you're there to do, as I see it. Probably agree, right? And the class needs to function as a community for the whole class to be successful in their learning, right? The class is a community, and in communities, we should also help those who are struggling in one way or another, or facing challenges in one way or another, to overcome those challenges. That's what communities do. That's what they should do. And when everyone is included, everybody wins. Okay. Okay. So having said all of that, some people would say, okay, Claire, but what do I do if there's a child in my class who's autistic and who's disruptive? Because he is constantly humming while he's working. And the other children find it hard to concentrate because he's always like humming. Okay. At that stage, it's important to understand that the child may not be able to stop the humming. The child may not be able to immediately switch off the humming. Okay, so we have to, of course, the whole class, the whole community, we have to, as teachers, consider the whole class and do what's best for the whole class. But we also have to have that compassion for neurodiverse students who, maybe, yeah, like in this example, inadvertently disrupting the class. There has to be some compassion there, not just tolerance or not just, oh, well, if I have to do that, but there has to be some compassion there and some understanding that the child is unintentionally disrupting in nearly all cases. Okay, so this is why we need to be aware of these characteristics of autism and other types of neurodiversity so that we can show that compassion. That's what it all comes down to, really, I think, right? Being awareness leading to compassion, leading to success and winning for the whole class. Okay. So I want to start by looking at some stereotypes of autistic people. How many of these stereotypes have you heard? The first one is they take medication. Maybe a stereotype a bit more associated with people with ADHD than people with autism. But I remember when I first mentioned to my son's teachers this year that he has autism, the first thing they asked me was, what medication does he take? And I said, well, no, he doesn't take any medication. So I don't want to criticize, obviously, I don't want to criticize the taking of medication. But I think it's important to realize that this is a bit of a stereotype, a little bit misguided understanding of what it's like to be autistic. Some autistic people may take medication for depression because there's a high incidence of depression amongst autistic people, including autistic children. But generally, being autistic is not something that you need to take medication for. Okay. Autistic people are brilliant at maths. I can personally attest to the fact that this is not true as an autistic person who's rubbish at maths. And who I struggle to help my son with his third grade maths homework at times. So yeah, the stereotype of the brilliant savant mathematician with autism is definitely not true for everyone. I wish it was. To some extent, I wish I'd been better at maths at school. There's also the stereotype that autistic people have no social skills. So maybe the stereotype of Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory on TV, he's seen as, having no social skills. He does have friends, otherwise the series wouldn't work. But it's definitely, obviously, it's not true that autistic people have no friends. They certainly do. And they also have social skills. It's just that their social skills are different to neurotypical people's social skills. Their social skills are, let me tell you in great detail about this book I've been reading, or let me tell you in great detail about this thing I'm building from Lego, or whatever it may be. They like to go in deep in social situations. And for other people, that is a sign of social incompetence. I've also heard the stereotype or the assumption that everyone who is autistic lives in some kind of care facility. And it's important to say that, yeah, this is the case for some autistic people. Some autistic people are unable to cope with day-to-day life on their own because they're unable to cope with paying bills, talking to people they don't know, and they do need that care. But this is definitely not the case for everyone. Okay, most autistic people live happy and independent lives. And this feeds on to the last one. They can't speak, okay, or they have problems with speaking. What is more of a common issue, especially amongst autistic children, is what is called selective mutism, which you may have heard about, meaning they are physically able to speak, but they choose not to, usually because they feel extremely uncomfortable in the situation that they're in. So unfortunately, we have a lot of children going to school who have autism, who are just not speaking for weeks or months at a time because they feel overwhelmed by the situation that they're in socially. Their level of social comfort is so poor or so low, however you want to put it. Okay, so yeah, let's move on to stereotypes more in terms of how autistic people learn. So they can be seen as disruptive, causing problems, making noise. May be true, they may disrupt, but they're not necessarily disruptive. They may go to the other extreme and be very shy and quiet and really not interact with anyone or not even speak, as we just mentioned. They can't sit still. I can testify to the fact that this is not true. I spend a lot of time sitting still as an online teacher and writer, so I can definitely manage that. Most autistic people can also manage it. They can't write legibly, and there is a higher than average occurrence of a condition called dysgraphia amongst autistic people. And dysgraphia is a condition which makes it difficult for you to write legibly. So some autistic people, if they also have dysgraphia, will, of course, struggle to write legibly. But it's not an autistic trait in itself. They have a photographic memory. That makes me think. I wish. Now in my 40s, I sometimes struggle to remember where I put my keys. I wish I had a photographic memory. That fits into this, like the autistic savant stereotype. They don't want to work in groups. It's not really that they don't want to work in groups. It's just in some social situations in groups, they feel uncomfortable. Like if they're with people they don't feel comfortable with, they don't trust, or if they don't have a clear task to be getting on with, or maybe they're in a group with people whose ability level is lower than theirs, for example. They could feel frustrated because they're like, oh, why don't these people understand? It's so easy. That could lead to frustration, but it's not necessarily the case that they don't want to work in groups. In fact, neurodiverse people have some excellent qualities. It's really important to spotlight that. And it's not just me saying that. The people at GCHQ, as you can see here, also think that. I don't know if you've heard of GCHQ. You may well have done if you're from the UK. But if you're not from the UK, GCHQ is the central spy agency in the UK. So if James Bond was a real person, he would work at GCHQ. And the current director of GCHQ, Anna Keyes-Butler, has said, neurodiversity and dyslexic thinking are highly valued at GCHQ. In fact, they are mission critical. We need the right mix of minds to keep the country safe, and our neurodivergent staff can think creatively, spot patterns, and solve problems that other employees might miss. Okay, so that's really great that she's making such a positive statement about neurodiversity, isn't it? So you notice she's also used the term neurodivergence. That's a term that some people use as an alternative to neurodiverse, or neurodivergence, the noun. And she separated neurodiversity and dyslexic thinking, which is interesting because usually we think of dyslexia as being part of neurodiversity, but okay, she's seeing them as different things. Yeah, and you may well have heard of Alan Turing, the great Alan Turing, the famous code breaker. He's widely believed to be autistic. The English code breaker, Alan Turing. He's widely believed to have been autistic, and he, famously was the lead figure in cracking the Enigma code for the Allies during World War II. Okay, so in the next part, I want to look at how inclusive strategies help everyone. So inclusive strategies do not only help neurodiverse people when that's what they're targeted at, but they can help everyone. And here are some examples that show that to be true. An example of an inclusive strategy which will help neurodiverse people is giving clear instructions and breaking instructions down step by step. Okay, this helps neurodiverse people to understand the instructions better. But it's also something that most of us, if you have done a CELTA course or any kind of teacher training course, I'm sure you will have been told to make your instructions clear. It's a basic principle of teaching a foreign language. So yeah, this helps neurodiverse people and also everyone. Neurodiverse people also prefer written instructions to verbal instructions. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't, yeah, written instructions too. Explaining changes that are going to happen. For example, from next week, our lessons will be taking place in room X. We won't be in room Y, and that's because of building work in room Y. And we'll be in room X for 6 weeks, and then we'll be back to room Y. This is, of course, helpful for everyone. When change is happening, it's helpful for everyone to know why and what's happening. But it's especially important for autistic people who find change very unsettling and need that explanation. Autistic people also have a need for being made aware of the real world relevance of the tasks they're asked to do. This increases their motivation. But of course, this is also helpful for every student to know, how could you use this language? Why are we learning this? Neurodiverse learners may take a lot of time to complete tasks because they have this kind of perfectionist trait, which makes them want to just keep going until everything is perfect. But they also often finish tasks very quickly, so they need extra tasks. But, giving fast finishers extra tasks is also a principle of language teaching, right? Neurodiverse students, especially autistic students, I should say, I'm focusing on autistic students, they like to have the chance to ask as many questions as they wish. Even if it's, say, a grammar topic, present simple versus present continuous, they want to be able to ask questions, why this, how does that work, etc. But, these are all things that teachers, you're probably doing anyway. So when I talk about autism with teachers, I've noticed a lot of them say to me, "Oh, Claire, this is all very well that you're telling me what to do to help autistic students, but how do I know if my students are autistic? I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. So how should I know?" Completely fair enough. It's difficult to help students through their autism experience if you don't know that they're autistic. How can you? So yeah, you may not know that your students are autistic because they may not know it themselves, especially if they're children. A lot of autistic people are diagnosed with autism in their pre-teen age or teenager age, or as adults. Some people are not diagnosed until they're 40. So the student themselves may not know that they're autistic. If they do know, they or their parents may not feel comfortable with disclosing it, or they may still be in the process of getting a diagnosis as for autism, which can take several years. Sometimes parents don't want to disclose it because they feel like it's going to be a sort of black mark against their child, which is obviously due to a negative perception of autism. And perhaps the child has got a diagnosis of autism, perhaps the parent has informed the school of this, but somehow this information has been lost and hasn't got to you for whatever reason. Okay, so these are all the reasons why you may not know that a child is autistic. And of course, it's not your job to diagnose your students with autism, and you shouldn't try. But there are certain characteristics or tendencies that you can kind of look out for. And these include a student completing a task poorly, even though they have the ability to do it well. And you know they have the ability to do it well from talking to them. But then when they had a written task, they've performed poorly. And you're like, that seems strange. And if that happens consistently, they were not just having a bad day, but something is going wrong between them knowing stuff and applying stuff. Often autistic students can concentrate better when they work alone. So that may also be a sign. Autistic students often think that their teacher hates them for no reason, without any reason. I know my son is always super nervous around kind of parents' evening times. It's like, oh no, she's gonna say that I'm not good. And it's always like, oh yeah, Henry, he's great. He's doing great. But there's this nervousness of like, does the teacher like me? And the student shouts out answers in class. This is also an issue that my son has been dealing with for about 2 years. We've only just about got to the point where he doesn't do this anymore. It's been a journey. Or the student is wearing less or lighter clothing than other students. So by that, I mean, it's winter in January, it's cold, and the child is wearing a short sleeve t-shirt. And the reaction of most neurotypical people to that is, oh, why are you wearing a t-shirt? Aren't you cold? Are you all right? And, it's just because of sensory issues of feeling uncomfortable when you're hot and kind of fear of being too hot. So yeah, obviously not something you should shame students for. So if you notice several of these tendencies, it's a good idea to maybe have a chat with the parents first if you can, and just mention what you've noticed and leave it with them, because they're ultimately going to be the ones who are going to have to go and find a diagnosis for the child. The child can't do it themselves. And I think it's important that you do this because being an undiagnosed autistic person can be very difficult, not knowing why you are doing the things that you're doing. And that brings me to a page from this book, Unmasked, by Ellie Middleton, who you can find on LinkedIn. She's a neurodiverse influencer, you could say, and talks a lot about neurodiversity. She's a young woman who a lot of young people can relate to. And she has written here, to grow up as an undiagnosed autistic person or ADHDer is to spend a lifetime being gaslit, ostracized, and misunderstood. It is only natural that our mental health would suffer as a result of that. So people's mental health is going to suffer if they're not diagnosed. So doing what you can to help them to become diagnosed, if you notice these tendencies, is only going to do them good. Right. Okay. So then we need to move on to, what is it like to be an autistic learner? Specifically when it comes to learning. So what you can see here, I don't know if anyone recognizes this, what is going on here, or what language this is, but it is Chinese characters. Words for, yeah, I know the first one is sky. As from my son, he is learning Chinese because he's growing up trilingual and he really loves languages. So we thought it'd be great for him to learn another one. So he's learning Chinese. And he loves doing drawing the characters on this grid. And this is really fun and really engaging for him. He can do this all day, this like repetition of drawing the characters. And this is kind of typical of a lot of autistic learners. Repetition often feels comforting and good and not boring. Repetition is good. It's kind of the opposite of what you think for a lot of students. Repetition is good. But they like repetition in terms of I'm going to write the same letter or character 100 times, but they don't really like repetition in terms of let's review all the tenses again because they're like, oh, I know all the tenses, like don't need to review that. So there can be a fine line between what they like and don't like when it comes to repetition. They switch between phases of high focus and distraction. This is just because all of the sensory processing which is going on and all of the dealing with social situations, it's like their computer, inner computer, is getting a bit hot and then stops working. They can feel disconnected from their teacher. Like I mentioned, this kind of perception that their teacher hates them, even though there's no evidence for that. They can easily feel overwhelmed or frustrated because they're under challenged. So it's not that autistic students find learning difficult. They often find learning easy, but they get very unhappy and they may even perform poorly when they feel like they're under challenged. They need enough challenge. The classroom can be a scary place for autistic learners, and especially the playground. There are sensory issues, especially if they have to wear a uniform. That can be really unpleasant, especially with like a shirt and tie. And just the having to negotiate all of the social interactions can just be so difficult. You know, how do I make people like me? I don't know. Should I say something funny or what is funny? Just the classroom and school generally can be a scary place for autistic students. That's why, unfortunately, we find a lot of autistic young people staying at school, staying at home, because they don't want to go to school. It's difficult. So finally, we're going to look at some changes that you can make, some practical changes that you can make in your classroom to help autistic students specifically. So I've divided this into changes you can make before the lesson when you're planning your lesson and changes you can make during the lesson. Because I think, especially with autistic students, how you plan the lesson is really important. Think about how you can give those clear and step-by-step instructions that I mentioned. Prepare extension activities because autistic students are likely to be amongst the fast finishers and they'll get frustrated if they don't have additional work. But on the other hand, plan in time for autistic students needing longer to complete a task. Have some understanding for the fact that it's really important for them to at least try to complete something perfectly and really put a lot of work into it. Think about where you're going to seat the autistic students or how you're going to group or pair them based on what you know about who they feel most comfortable with. And planning time for question and answer sessions so that they can ask all of those questions that they want to ask. Okay. So then moving on to changes you can make during the lesson and the topic of stimming, which we haven't really discussed yet. Have we heard of what stimming is before? If you haven't, it's a kind of thing which autistic and ADHD people do to kind of, how can we describe it? To sort of deal with anxiety, deal with discomfort in social situations. And it's often a repetitive movement. Or it could be a sort of clicking maybe with your mouth or just some kind of repetitive movement. Again, as I said earlier, autistic people feel comfort in repetition with learning. And that's also what we see with stimming, the repetition of a specific action. And a lot the natural tendency amongst teachers, if they see a student, say, tapping on the desk, is to say, stop it. What are you doing? Stop it. But, we should really, show that compassion I mentioned and understand that the child is doing that because it's helping them to cope and they would otherwise struggle to cope. And unless that tendency is really disruptive or really harmful to them or other people, we should let them do it. Don't automatically tell them to stop it. Try and talk to them about it. Why are you doing that? That's irritating other people a bit. Maybe try not to do that if you can. But understand the fact that they may not necessarily have control. And it's not that they're wanting to disrupt everyone. Don't criticize or openly express surprise at reactions to sensory overload. So don't be like, oh, why are you wearing that t-shirt? Monitor students so you can think about where to seat them and how to group them. Have regular one-to-one check-ins so they know that you don't hate them. And consider adapting homework tasks so that they fit better with this profile of enough challenge, comfort in repetition, and maybe even getting them to bring in their special interests. We know autistic people love their special interests. Okay, so that's all that I have to say, except to say thank you for listening. And if you would like to email me, you can. My email address is very easy to remember. It's just my name, clairehart@gmail.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Claire Hart. I think I'm probably the only Claire Hart on LinkedIn who has a photo of the Alps as their background photo, so you'll recognize me. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you awfully for that. Absolutely wonderful session. Thank you. I'm gonna
Thank
pin
you.
that up. Just so enlightening. So I love how open you are in this talk, Claire. Thank you so much for. I think it really helps. I think it's so enlightening for people to hear that from you. We've got loads of questions again.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't know where to start because
Okay.
we've all got to continue with it. So I'm going to ask you one. Hold on a sec. I did bookmark one. And then we will. Everyone who's put questions in. I'm dismissing some questions. It's not because I think they shouldn't be answered. We're going to find a solution for this after the festival's finished. We've had so many questions on neurodiversity today, so we will find a solution. I'm going to ask a couple now, but we will find a solution to it after the festival's over to answer some of these questions. So Claire, one question here is, are there different levels of autism? There's the autism spectrum, so I'm guessing it does have a spectrum, and different types of autism. How does that all work?
Well, yeah, I mean that's why we get the term autism spectrum recognizes the fact that there is a huge amount of diversity within autistic people. And we generally tend to term it as high functioning autism
Okay.
or low functioning, high or low functioning autism. So when we think of high functioning autism, we think about people like me, I imagine, who have autism, but are able to live their lives pretty normally.
Okay.
And by normally, I mean they have a job, they are not they're not under any kind of care. They are able to, and they live independently. They don't live with dependents or
Uh-huh.
in some kind of care facility. So high functioning autistic people, will still have sensory issues and all of those other things, but they can manage to live their lives independently.
Right.
Whereas with people with low functioning autism, they, as I mentioned a little bit, they may not be able to live their lives independently, because the sensory challenges they're facing and the motoric challenges they're facing and the cognitive challenges they're facing are just too overwhelming for them. So that's why we get the term autism spectrum to recognize that there's a lot of diversity in terms of how well people can function. I don't know how else to put it other than that, just how well they can live independently. That's what it comes down to, really.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Mhm.
thank you, Claire. That does answer the question, I think, very nicely.
Mm.
One more. I don't know how easy this is going to be to answer. Anna's asking, when you're talking about the slide with stereotypes associated with autism, some of the traits that you mentioned characterize certain people with a degree of introvertedness as well. To
Mm.
what extent does autism overlap with sort of the general characteristics of being an introvert?
That's an interesting question. Well, I suppose it overlaps in the sense that, yeah, autistic people can find social interactions challenging, so therefore they're more likely to avoid social interaction. If you
Okay.
find something challenging, you're likely to avoid it or not do it so often.
Uh-huh.
And you could say that's similar to introverts, because you could say introverts also prefer to be at home with a good book and a cup of tea rather than going out to a party. So in that sense, there are similarities, but that's the only real similarities.
Okay.
I think it's also important just to mention quickly, for example, my husband, he's also autistic and he is an extrovert. I would definitely categorize him as an extrovert. He has
Right.
loads of friends. He has more friends than anyone else I know. And he loves socializing. So I think it's important to point out, there's also that side. That also exists.
It's not a characteristic
Yeah, I don't
synonymous
think you
or
can say that. I mean,
exclusive. Yeah.
you can't say that all autistic people are introverts, basically,
No.
because that's
Okay.
not true.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Claire. That's great. We will answer some more questions another time, I think, and let you have
Okay.
hopefully a bigger break this time, in time for your third session again tonight. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, thank you so much for coming along. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Cheers,
Bye.
Claire. Thanks. Bye. Okie dokie, everybody. What a session, hey? Yes? Michelle, what do you think? What a session. Let's have an adjective to describe the session. Go for it. One adjective to describe the session. Great. Wasn't it? Just really, really eye-opening, actually. Just such a refreshing look at it. Not that other looks are not refreshing or sort of moldy in any way. It's just, I love the way that Claire just did that. Very open and very first-hand experience as well. So I'm not going to dilly-dally. I've got to dilly-dally a little bit to get my slides up. Bear with me a second. Got to get my slide up. Here we go. There's that. Even Boelo's waiting nice and patiently for me. Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
All right. All right. You good?
Yes, I'm absolutely good. I'm thrilled to be here again. It's really, really, really great to be here. And
Amazing.
to see
Amazing.
so many teachers. It's amazing. So many teachers that are interested in this topic. It's so tremendously important.
I mean, they're all proactively interested in it as well. It's not
Very
just sort of
much,
people coming
yeah.
because it's the 10th day. People are coming because it's
Yeah.
neurodiversity
No,
day.
and when I was listening to Claire's talk as well, I could see the reactions of people and the amount of questions and a really, really good reflexive reactions as well of many people. So I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
really see that it's something that people are very interested in.
Very a great keenness to understand.
Yes, very much.
Okay, so to zoom in on you, Boelo, and your life entirely for the next few seconds, you may not like that very much, but we're going to do it.
No worries.
So 30 years in ELT, and what? So before, so I know, having spoken to you about this before and having known you, that there was a certain point in your life where you were diagnosed with dyslexia.
Mhm.
But there was a point before that, for a very long time now, when you were in ELT. What were you doing before you took a zoom in on dyslexia?
Um, I I started in the language teaching industry, basically, not from an ELT perspective, but from an LE perspective, actually, in a Spanish language school.
Okay,
Here I live in Spain, in the south of Spain, in Malaga, so that's where I started.
well, lucky for
And
you.
I moved to the UK for a year and a half to manage a school there. I'm more from the management side as well and course organization. Moved
Okay,
back to Spain, set up my own school, and then over time I trained as a language coach as well. Got more in touch with. I got very interested in the students that find it difficult to learn. that was always my passion, trying to help all the students in the school. And then when I realized that there's such a high percentage of students that are neurodiverse, that find it difficult to learn, and I could reflect it immediately to my own experiences as a language learner and as a person in general. And then I realized that I'm dyslexic myself. And I said, well, oh, this is it. From now on, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to try and help these people, and most of all, help other teachers understand this and being able to work with their dyslexic students.
Brilliant. And it's great to watch you, Boelo. You're great. I love how vocal you are and how you're such a strong advocate on. I mean, I see you a lot on LinkedIn. It's great to see the things you have to say on there. He will share his details later, and I strongly recommend following Boelo on LinkedIn, by the way. Over to you, mate. Have a great session. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Will. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this beautiful these three sessions. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. This brings us back to COVID time, more or less. Well, there we go. Your lazy students might not be lazy at all. And hopefully during this session, during the next half an hour, you will find out why. Before we start, I asked Will and his colleagues to set up 3 poll questions for you, because I would like to get some information from you. If we can get the first question up, please, Will. Yes, there you go. So first of all, talking about laziness in this session and perceived laziness, how many of your students would you say are lazy or unmotivated to learn English? You can go from hardly any to the majority. If Will, if you can read out the answers to me, because I don't think that I can see them.
Yes, I can see them here, Boelo. I'll let it settle for a minute.
Yeah. It's a lot of people here. It's not knowing that they are lazy, but this is about perceived, that you would go into the class in a teacher's room and you would talk about a student, and the teacher would go, oh yeah, that's a lazy bum, you know, that type of student. Oh well, she's not very motivated to learn English.
So we've got about 7% on hardly any. Maybe around 10% is 26% of people are answering that one. Then 34% people say around 20%. Almost half of them it's difficult because it's all percentages. 25% say almost half of them, and 8% say the majority of them.
It's basically between probably around 20 and almost half of them. So basically between 20 and 40, more or less, what people have said. Now, the next question, maybe something about yourself, about your own experience. It's interesting for me to know as well. The average number of students that you teach on an annual basis. So how many students do you usually see annually? It could be that you're working in a school, but not in summer. That might be less, but it can also be that you're working in a private language school with a lot of different groups, and even do some summer camps. So just for me to know, and for you as well, later on, I'll let you know why, if it is less than 25 or even over 100. We'll see what type of teachers we have in the room.
Okay, so
yes,
9% say less than 25. 12% say between 25 and 50. 17% say between 51 and 75. 23% say between 76 and 100. And 38% say over 100.
That's actually a lot of teachers that see over 100 students on a yearly basis. Now, my last question is probably easier to answer. This is your teaching experience. So basically, how long have you been doing what you're doing? Are you a completely novel teacher, so you basically just finished your degree and just started, or between 2 and 5, 6 and 10, 11 and 20, or you're a veteran teacher and you've been in this for over 20 years?
Okay, still lots of responses coming in. I'll give it a sec. Okay. 2% less than 1, 13% between 2 and 5, 15% between 6 and 10, 26% between 11 and 20, 44% say over 20. Wow.
Wow, we've got very experienced teachers here.
Crumbs.
It's wow, it's amazing. It's the if we add that between 11 and 20, so if we put basically everything above 10, I think that's more than half of the teachers will, right? That is, I didn't put it in my mind. My working memory isn't that good. You'll find out later why, but that's a lot of experience here. Is that extra weight on my shoulder now?
It is, I'm afraid, Boelo. Yeah, you've got some experience watching you now.
Yeah. And now it's like, is that true what you're saying? No, it is. No, but it's lovely. I really enjoy that when that happens. Thanks very much, Will.
For sure, no worries.
What I would like you to do now, you have analyzed yourself as well, the number of students you see on an average in an average year and your years of experience. I know you're not math teachers, but the math I'm going to ask you to do is not that very advanced. It's not rocket science. I'm going to ask you to multiply the years of experience, so to multiply the years that you've been teaching English by the average amount of students you see on a yearly basis. So say if you've had 10 years, well, say some teachers even more than 20. So say you've had 20 years teaching experience and you have an average 100 students per year. 20 times 100 is 2,000. And then realize that this number 2,000, that is the amount of students, that's the number of students that you have seen in your career. So in your career, you will have seen 2,000 students. 2,000 students pass through your classes. Now, when you have that number in your mind and you remember what you responded to the first question, which was about the perceived amount of lazy or unmotivated students in your class, and say you set 20%, I mean, just for the sake of argument, say you set 20%, which is more or less the majority between 20 and 40, 20% of 2,000 is 400. So you would say that you have seen 400 lazy students in your teaching career. And now, after 20 years, there's this Dutch guy living in Spain at the Global Teachers Festival saying to you that maybe those 400 lazy students weren't lazy at all. And we're going to find out why. But it's completely normal that you would think they were lazy, because this happens a lot. It happens to a lot of students that are labeled as lazy, as dumb, as unmotivated. Students like Tommy. And I'm going to tell a little short story about Tommy. Tommy is an 8-year-old boy. This is a true story. So Tommy's an 8-year-old boy, and one day he's in school, and after school the headmaster walks up to me and says, "Tommy, here's a letter. I need you, when you get home, I need you to give this letter to your mom. She should read this." And when he gets home, he gives the letter to his mother. She reads it, and the poor mother, she starts crying. He says, "Mommy, what does the letter say? Why are you crying?" And she said, "Well, actually, the letter says," and the mother is lying. She says, "The letter says, we cannot teach your son Tommy because he is too intelligent. There's nothing we can do for him. He is too bright. He is too wonderful. We think it is better that you teach him yourself." But he will find out later in his life, Tommy, that actually the letter did say, "We're very sorry, we can't teach your son because your son is lazy, your son is unmotivated, your son is basically dumb. So there's nothing we can do for him." So actually, Tommy is one of that maybe 20%, 25 perceived percent of students that are perceived lazy, unmotivated, and dumb. And this is usually the label that students get when they are dyslexic and they are undiagnosed. I'm going to let that sink in maybe for a second. We said 20% or even more of students perceived as lazy or unmotivated in your classes. And now I'm saying that maybe these students are dyslexic, because this is what happens with dyslexic students. When we talking about percentages, when we talk about dyslexia, the International Dyslexia Association and many other sources usually work with the same numbers. They say that 15 to 20% of the population shows signs of dyslexia. 15 to 20%. When you were talking about perceived laziness in your students, you said many of them 20 to 30%, or 20 in towards 40%. So here you go. You see this correlation between the students that you might label as lazy, but maybe there's something else, and maybe there is a dyslexia behind that perceived laziness of that student. Now, if you look at this slide, and if you look at it well, you see shows signs of dyslexia. It doesn't say is dyslexic, it shows signs of dyslexia, because one of the main issues with dyslexia, one of the big problems, and Will mentioned it before as well, I have only recognized my dyslexia. I only know that I'm dyslexic for about 7 years, more or less. The problem is that up to 80% of students with dyslexia even leave school without a diagnosis. And this is from the British Dyslexia Association. So that is 8 out of 10 dyslexic students leave school without knowing they're dyslexic. And many of them will even live their whole life, even die, without knowing they're dyslexic. And these children will go through school, all these years in school, thinking and believing they're lazy, thinking and believing they're unmotivated, and thinking and believing they're dumb. And this is true, and this comes up over and over again when you talk to dyslexic students and you interview families of dyslexic students as well. Now, what I would like you to take away from this session, this is why I created this session. I would like you to take away 3 things. It's just half an hour, but I think we can work on this. First of all, I would like you to take away what dyslexia is, so to have a better idea of what the condition is. I would like you to take away red flags. So when you walk into the classroom, you can start recognizing, again, the possible signs of dyslexia, or the signs of possible dyslexia. And I'm going to give you 5 teaching tips. So 5 things that you can do with your students in the classroom. And this is very important. The teaching tips that you use for your students with dyslexia work for all your students. It is never a matter of, this is for my 20% of dyslexic students and this is for the rest. It is always, what I do for my dyslexic students is adapted in such a way, is inclusive in such a way that I can use it for the whole classroom. It is not about putting extra work on your plate. It's all about taking work off your plate. It's all about making the teacher's life easier. But first of all, let's talk about what is dyslexia. It's a very complex condition to explain in a simple way, because dyslexia includes a lot of different elements. I'm going to go over a few of them a bit later. But if I would have to phrase it in one sentence, it would be this. It would be the dyslexic brain processes information in a different way. I'm going to explain what I mean with this, so to make it a little bit more visual for you. Let's imagine, to make it, for this argument, to make it simple, let's imagine that learning anything, so also learning a language, is nothing more than connecting 2 neurons in the brain. Yeah, so it's neuron A and neuron B are communicating, they're connecting. I basically take information from neuron A, from neuron B. That's learning, okay? Now, instead of neurons, for my example, I'm going to talk about villages. So I have village A and village B. And what I do in my brain, I take information from one village to the other one. And I'm going to explain in a very simple way, I'm going to explain 3 different types of brains. Now, the first brain, to take information from point A to point B, the first brain uses a Ferrari. Now, I don't know about you, I don't have a Ferrari. I actually never driven one, but I do gather that a Ferrari should be able to drive up to 230 kilometers an hour or even faster. So imagine you have an amazing fast Ferrari, and we have an American highway between village A and village B, like these 10 lanes one way and 10 lanes the other way, and no speed limit. So we can really take our Ferrari to full speed, hardly any traffic from village A to village B. So bang, split second, information is there. Again, this is not a scientific way of explaining the brain, but a very easy way to understand. This is how many times the autistic brain works. Now, Claire already talked about the autistic brain and how many times these students are actually very fast in processing information. Well, this is because their brain processes information in Ferrari in many cases. Now, the second brain processes information like this. This is a family car. This is a family car, and a normal road, like maybe maximum speed is 80 or 100 kilometers an hour. I'm living in Spain, so I'm going to say that this is a Seat Ibiza, but wherever you live, you can change the brand. And this just is a normal speed, so to speak, between village A and village B. The information gets there. There's no problem whatsoever. And this is what we could call a neurotypical brain. So Claire has talked a lot about neurodiverse brains, which is about 20-something% of the population, which also means then that the neurotypical brain is the rest of the population. It's everybody who is not neurodiverse. And the issue is that education in general, so our educational system is based on neurotypical brains. So you have been taught, TEFL course or a CELTA course, you have been taught to teach neurotypical brains. You have been taught to teach people who take information from village A to village B in a family. Now, the third brain, I guess you will understand where this is going. The third brain is the dyslexic brain. And the dyslexic brain goes like this. The dyslexic brain processes information on a bicycle. And I like it because every time I explain this and I have dyslexic people in the room, they all go like, oh, that really looks like my brain. And to be very honest, it does actually look like my brain as well. So my brain processes information many times slower. It takes me longer to process information, but on my way from village A to village B, I also have more time. I have the opportunity to look around, so I can enjoy my views. I can say, oh, that's a beautiful meadow. Oh, that's a nice little pond. Oh, there's ducks in there. Oh, there's some cows in there. They're eating. Oh, it's a beautiful farm over there that I see in the far. And oh, maybe I can take a detour because I think there's some apples growing over there. Maybe I can take some apples and put them in my bag as well. And maybe in the meantime, something falls out of it. I'm losing some information on the way between A and B. And then when I get to village B, and this is very important to understand, when I get to village B, I can enter village B from whatever angle I like. This is a very important concept for me to understand. So if it's in a Ferrari, 10 lanes, there's only one way to get into village B. If it's on a normal road, there might be 2 or 3 different ways to enter village B. But if I'm on my bicycle and I'm a little bit anarchic, I really can enter village B from many different angles. And this is both a weakness and a strength of the dyslexic brain. So it's not that we can't do certain things, it's just that we do it differently, and sometimes we might take longer doing so. Now, talking about red flags, which was number 2 on the list. One of the main red flags, there's a whole list of items that you can go through to screen for dyslexia, to try to recognize dyslexia in your students. I'm going to give the most important ones. And maybe the most important red flag is the unexpectedness. Now, I'm going to explain what I mean. Unexpectedness, which is also called the discrepancy model. And the discrepancy model is all about what the student knows. So I know that you know this, and what the students can show you, what the student can produce. And I'm going to explain this, same as with the analogy before, I'm going to explain this with an example. Imagine that language learning is nothing more than a combination of learning grammar and vocabulary. I know it's more, but for this example, I just want to simplify this. So it's learning grammar, learning vocabulary. I do both, bang, I know a new language. And imagine at the beginning of a course, you have a group of students and you just want to check their level. Just as an activity, just to see where everybody stands. And I say to my students, okay, kids, teens, whatever, we are going to do a speaking activity. I want you to talk for 5 minutes to your partner about, I don't know, your weekend, just the weekend or the week or whatever. Talk about this. And you have this one student who just starts rattling away, just starts talking and talking and talking and with good pronunciation and intonation and prosody, amazing grammatical structures, very rich vocabulary that you would go like, wow, where does this vocabulary come from? Even idioms that are actually from a higher level. So basically, you would say this student is here. This student is top of class. And you actually wonder if that student might not have to move up a level. but you don't. And maybe better that you don't, because next class, same group, you say to the same group of students, hey, we're going to do another exercise. And now instead of talking about your weekends, your holidays, we're going to write about it. So it's the same topic, basically same vocabulary, same grammatical structures, everything's here, but now we're going to do it in writing. And at the end of the class, you ask them for like a one-page writing. At the end of the class, that particular student hands in 2 mere paragraphs. A very short writing, 2 paragraphs, very poor grammar, very poor vocabulary, very repetitive structures as well. Something that you would go like, honestly, you, and even with stupid spelling mistakes. This is when the student is here, actually almost bottom of class. And this is when you as a teacher would say, hey, but this student can do more if he wants to. This is an argument that dyslexic students hear a lot. You can do more if you want to. And you say, why? Well, because I have seen it. I have seen you producing this, and now you are producing that. So maybe you are lazy, maybe you are unmotivated, uninterested, whatever. But the thing is, the students can do more, and this is the discrepancy model. The student can do more if it is in a different format. So the student can produce if it is in spoken format, but cannot produce it if it is in written format. It's that unexpectedness, that discrepancy, which is one of the main red flags when screening for dyslexia. Other red flags, as I said before, dyslexia includes a lot of different elements. There's a whole list of elements, but the most important ones, I'm going to go over them right now. The first is phonological processing. Now, dyslexia is all about phonological awareness. It's the brain, how the brain processes phonology, and the understanding that language is built up of phonemes, of small parts of the sounds. That sometimes is very difficult. Usually it's difficult for the dyslexic brain to process, and it is more difficult to process reading. So it is the decoding of the written word that is more difficult for the dyslexic student. It takes longer. It's on a bike than for neurotypical students, which makes the dyslexic students a slower reader. So usually dyslexic students read much slower than other students in the class. In my case, for instance, wherever I am, whatever happens, I always read slower than the vast majority of people around me. It's not that I can't read, it's just that it takes me longer to do so. We're usually also slower writers, and maybe even worse writers than non-dyslexics. Not that we can't write, it's not that we can't think. It's a mix of, again, that whole process where the reading is a process of decoding. It is processing the written word into a spoken word in my brain. With the writing, it is taking a spoken word or a concept in my brain and transfer that to a written word. That is the encoding process. That takes longer as well. But it's also organizing the ideas in my head of what I want to write on a piece of paper. It's organizing it on the piece of paper, making it in a sequence. And then the actual physical writing, which is many times more difficult for dyslexic students as well. And then we have attention deficit. Then now you might say, oh, no, Boelo, no. You're overstepping your boundaries here. This is not you. You shouldn't be talking about this. That's the next talk. That's Vicky's talk, which is really good as well. So you better stay, which is about attention deficit. No, dyslexia as well. So dyslexia also has to do with attention deficit. And what you will see, and when you have done the whole 3 sessions, so by all means stay until the end, you will see that there's a lot of similarity between autism, dyslexia, ADHD. It is actually called comorbidity. This is the overlap. There is a very high overlap between the 3 conditions. When you have a autistic person or a person with autism, it is very likely, or it can be, that a person also has ADHD. When you have someone with ADHD, it's very likely that they also have dyslexia, etc. So there is a very high level of comorbidity. Attention deficit, very important for students with dyslexia. We find it very difficult to focus and to keep attention for a long period of time. So anything that's over 7 or 10 minutes. And the last of my red flags is working memory. So many students with dyslexia have a very bad, limited working memory. Usually a neurotypical student can manipulate up to 5 or 7 chunks of information in their working memory at the same time. A dyslexic student, maybe 2 or 3. So when you give a lot of instructions at the same time, do this and this and this and this and this, that's 5, that's too much. If we give them too much vocabulary, if we talk too much, if it's too much grammar, if I write on the board and talk at the same time and ask them to do something in their notebook, that's too much at the same time. It's all to do with working memory and attention deficit. Now, the beauty is that dyslexia is not all about weaknesses. And what we've looked at so far, is all about weaknesses. But Dr. Sally Shaywitz, and she's one of the most renowned experts worldwide on dyslexia, she describes dyslexia very wisely as an island of weaknesses in a sea of strengths, or even an ocean of strength. And this is very much true, because whenever you have a dyslexic student in front of you, it is not only about the weaknesses, it should also be about the strengths. If it is a student that only has or only shows the weaknesses, it might even not be dyslexia. So dyslexia really has that strength side to it as well. We're going to go over some of the strengths right now, so you can see what they are. But before I go there, I do want to stress that usually the problem with dyslexia is that society in general, and the students as well, we are so tremendously focused on the weaknesses. We are so tremendously focused on what the students can't do, on what doesn't work for them, that we completely forget their strengths. And I believe that if we turn that around, and without forgetting the weaknesses, we learn what the strengths of our students are, and we find that out, we can use that to our advantage when we teach these students. Strengths of dyslexic students. First of all, dyslexic students are very creative, very, very creative. When you've got a dyslexic student in your class, they're bound to be someone who can also draw very well, or they come up with the amazing stories. They're usually very funny. They're very humoristic. They can come up from different angles. They might be good actors. They might be good singers. They might be good painters. They might be good at fixing things as well. They're usually very creative. They're usually at least average intelligent, if not above intelligent. Actually, one of the tests that you have to do when you're being diagnosed is an intelligence test. So they have to make sure that your problems with reading and writing, or maybe other problems, do not have to do with your intelligence. Big picture and out of the box thinking. Dyslexics are extremely good at this. For us, it is more difficult to see or to identify or focus on minor details. But if you give me the big picture, if I can put it in context, it's very important. If I can put it in context, everything is much easier for me to understand. Plus, with the creativity as well, the out-of-the-box thinking, I can come up with ideas that maybe other people would not have thought of, and for me it's completely logical to do so. I can also solve problems that neurotypical people might find more difficult to solve. And then I could even think like, how can you not see this? I remember at the school that I used to run for 25 years, there would be many situations where my colleagues would walk up to me and would say, "Oh, Boelo, we've got a problem, we've got this issue, we've been debating for, I don't know, maybe 1 hour, and it was 3 of them, and we're trying to solve this problem, but we really don't know what to do. Can you help us?" And it would literally, I'm not exaggerating, it would literally take me 4 to 5 questions, a little mind map, which I would draw with those questions, and 2 or 3 minutes to solve their problem. I could look at it, I would create the big picture for myself, I would solve the problem. So yeah, this is the solution. And they would look at me as if I were some kind of guru, and they would say, "How on earth can you see this? How it's 1 hour and we can't, and you can in 2 minutes?" And then I, in the end, would say, well, I process information differently. I took this on a bicycle, I took a detour, I took it one way and the other. So this is one of my strengths, but there are many weaknesses that I have as well. So everyone has something on either side. And this one, 3D thinking. Dyslexics are very good at 3D thinking. And what I mean by 3D thinking, I'm going to explain to you. I'm going to give you an example. That's probably better. I'm going to give you an example. Think of a car. in your head. Just picture a car in your head. When you've got it, look at it from the other side. Now, look at it from the rear. Look at it from the front. Look at it from the top. Look at it from the bottom. Now, open the trunk and look into the trunk. Now, if you, with every instruction, with every prompt, if you have had a different image in your head, so I think it was about 6 or 7 different instructions, if you have had 6 or 7 different images in your head, that's a very neurotypical way of thinking, of representing information in your head. A very dyslexic person would have had a car in their head, and they would have turned the car around, or they would have walked around the car. They would have literally manipulated the image in their head in a 3D way. This is why many dyslexics end up working in engineering, in architecture, in designing, anything that needs those skills, those 3D thinking. And do you remember Claire before what she said about 007, about James Bond and his colleagues? Problem solving, big picture thinking, being creative, out of the box thinking, all strengths that you need for those kind of jobs as well. So now we've looked at what dyslexia is, that it is a different way of the brain in processing the information it receives. We have looked at the red flags, the unexpectedness. We've looked at the weaknesses. We've looked at the strengths. We have seen that it is an island of weaknesses in a sea of strengths. And honestly, when you do screen for dyslexia, you have to look at both sides, the weaknesses and the strengths. And now we're going to the next one. We're going to the next section. This is going to be about teaching tips. So I'm going to give you 5 teaching tips. I think we've got time enough for this. 5 teaching tips that you can take straight away into your classroom Monday morning, or if you work on Sunday or Saturday, next class, and use this with your students. And remember, this doesn't only work for your neurodiverse students or your dyslexic students, this also works for the rest of your students. Number 1, less text, more visuals. I'm not saying no text, I'm saying less text, okay? It is good. But I do say more visual, so more visual material. Dyslexic students are visual thinkers. We are much more visual than verbal thinkers. And visual thinking also is faster, so the brain processes information faster when it is visual than when it is verbal, when it is text-based. I mean, we do say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And it is true because it is much faster. And the visual thinking, that's one of the strengths of the dyslexic student. The use of colors is very important. We use colors for everything we do with dyslexic students. We use colors to highlight the important parts of text, of an explanation, or of a word. So if you use a text, we use colors. We either highlight them like this, or we change the colors of the letters, the phonemes. It could be to highlight a phoneme, like here, the OU is what phoneme, so there might be a spelling issue with my student. It could be a keyword in a text. I want to highlight the important words in a text. It could also be an idiom that I want to highlight, or it could be grammar. I could highlight the ing ending because that's what maybe we are working on. But, and this is very important, I have to be coherent. I have to be coherent in the use of my colors and in the use of my visuals as well, because this is not about filling the page with 10,000 colors. It is not, oh yeah, this guy Boelo, he told us that dyslexic students are very creative. So, we'll just chuck in 20 images on the page and I'll just make sure there are at least 15 different colors, just put the whole rainbow there as well, just to make it nice and appealing for students with dyslexia. No, that's making it worse. It's not about overwhelming them. It is about making it useful for them. So have few visuals, but very powerful ones, and be coherent in your visuals over time, and use your colors wisely, not too much at the same time. Use it very, very wise. Holistic approach. Holistic approach is all about how you explain things to students, how you teach students. I always give the same example. If you give me an exercise and the exercise has 10 questions and I have to fill in the gaps with maybe grammar, yeah, so maybe conjugation of verbs. and it's 10 questions that have no relation to each other. So it's 10 individual questions about random different things. That is more difficult for me to process than when you give me a text that is all connected, so that's all coherent. It's a text about one topic with the 10 gaps. So for you as a teacher, I'm still doing a grammar exercise because I'm still doing that in the same text. But for me, it is much more easier to do this because it is in a context. I can see this. And if it is individual questions, which is smaller, which is more detailed, it's much more difficult for me to do this. It's an example of how we can work holistically with our students. There's many more things we can do, but just to explain what I mean. This one is element, chunking. You will hear this over and over again today. I think you heard it from Claire. It's very likely that you're going to hear this from Vicky as well. Chunking is all about how you break up what you do in class, how you break up your material for your students. Remember what we talked about before. Remember that we talked about the working memory. Remember that we talked about the attention span. So chunking is all about helping these students digest the information. So we want to give them chunkable chunks that are chewable, that are digestible for our students. That's what we do. I usually say one concept at a time, one concept per chunk. Chunk is done, a brain break, new chunk, brain break, new chunk, etc. And the very last teaching tip for you is giving very, very, very clear instructions. Yeah, Claire said it before, probably Vicky will say it later as well, because this works for all neurodiverse students. Giving clear instructions is adamant for students with dyslexia. Why? Because remember, these students process information on their bicycle. And I told you at the beginning, they can enter village B from whichever angle they like. So when you give them instructions, you think it's clear for you? Definitely not, because they can interpret it in 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 different ways that you would never think of. So make sure that the instructions are very clear, the steps are very clear, and maybe even ask your students to reflect back on you and say, these are the instructions, what do you have to do? What have you understood by the instructions that I just gave you? And then see what their reaction is. That's it. That leads us to Tommy. Remember the story at the beginning, the true story about Tommy? So Tommy's mother started teaching him for many, many years in different ways. She actually used the strategies that we were just talking about because she knew that he was a holistic thinker. She could see that he was very good at thinking out of the box. He was very creative. He was inventive. She would use very different strategies because actually he was an inventor. And one of the things that he invented over his life, very prolific life, one of the things he invented was the light bulb. So obviously now you go like, well, maybe it's not this Tommy, maybe it is this Tommy that I was talking about. Actually, I was talking about the life of Thomas Alva Edison, who was very dyslexic, who was kicked out of school as a child. His mother taught him in a very different way with very different teaching strategies. And this is what made him such a wonderful and beautiful and amazing inventor. So next time you see a lazy or perceived lazy student in your class, maybe think, is the student lazy? Or maybe is the student not lazy? And maybe I have a neurodiverse brain sitting right in front of me. Thank you very much. And as I always like to finish everything I do, long live the dyslexic brain. I'm not wearing it right now because it's a t-shirt and it's, although I live in Spain, it is not that warm right now. Thank you very much. You're muted, Will.
I know. I was just practicing. I was practicing what I was about to say to you. Yeah, I do that every time. You just, yeah. Good stuff. Thank you so much, Boelo. What a talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Just
really insightful. Really, your analogies I think really help. They really help me. The bicycle analogy that you did earlier on. It really helps to understand. That's why you did it, and it's just very well thought out. Thank you for doing that.
It is a very, and this is why I do this because it is a very visual way of showing things, and when teaching, they go like, oh yeah, no, I get this now, I understand this better.
Yeah.
If you understand it better, you're neurotypical. Imagine your dyslexic student who is very visual.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we can't even start to answer all the questions.
No, of course, yeah.
I'll throw a few at you if you don't mind.
By all means.
Okay, any literature or not? Well, literature, yes, but kind of resources with quite practical stuff that's going to help people with dyslexic students.
Am I allowed to be cheeky here?
Yeah.
I would actually go to my website, because I didn't want to
cheeky.
promote
I thought you were going to talk about some.
No. Actually, on my, if anyone, there's a lot of stuff out there. So I would say, I mean, go online and look for stuff. But if you really want to go for something, I would say go to my website, boelo.com. I have a
That's
free
too fast,
guide.
below. Whoa.
No, my full. Shall I share again? So
please do.
It's
put,
there.
Put it back up.
Yeah, I'll share it.
Several comments asking for some.
Yeah, there you go. So it's my website, boelo.com. There is a free guide on teaching languages to students with dyslexia. Yeah. The only thing I'll ask for you is your email address, and that's it. I would also say follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Instagram, and maybe even YouTube, because there are a lot of videos there as well. It's probably the best source that I can think of. Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sorry about that.
I said it earlier, Boelo. Your LinkedIn is really great, really insightful. It's not just it's not airy fairy stuff. There's lots of airy fairy stuff on LinkedIn. It's really, really helpful stuff. Okay, but I think we're going to stop there actually to try and
yeah, because Vicky's up next.
Vicky's up next. We've still got one more talk to go. It's a long session,
and
we're going to find a solution.
Stay here because next talk is amazing. You're going to love it. Absolutely.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Thank you, Boelo. See you later on this evening.
See you later. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye. Okie dokie, everyone. We are going to take a. I feel like such a TV show host when I say this. We're going to take a short break. And it is a commercial break. You'll be glad to know it's not just silence. It's actually a commercial break. You'll be glad to hear. If I just go clickety click, make sure I share my sound this time. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to leave you just for a couple of minutes with a video about a new initiative of ours. You will be interested in this. You're here for this session, and you're going to want to hear what this video has to say. Over to you, video.
Imagine a classroom where learning is inclusive and every student can access the same learning resources no matter their abilities. The European Accessibility Act, or EAA, is making this a reality. The EAA is an EU directive designed to remove barriers for people with disabilities. From the 28th of June 2025, a range of products and services, including e-books and computers, must meet new accessibility standards. Harmonised standards will mean more sharing of research and more innovation. That can only lead to better resources, better learning for everyone, and more classes where every student can succeed. For example, to be accessible, e-books should be compatible with assistive technology, allow text to be resized and images to contain alt text, and include closed captions for video. Schools need to ensure the products and services they provide to students meet EAA standards. Macmillan Education is here to help schools in their journey to make their schools more accessible. You can 1. Ask your Macmillan Education representative to summarise our accessibility approach. 2. Browse our library of resources created to help shape inclusive classrooms. 3. Ensure teachers are given time and seek support to get to grips with new technology and resources. If you are a Macmillan Education customer, be assured we are with you every step of the way to ensure classrooms are as inclusive as possible and every student has the chance to shine. Our ongoing commitment to accessibility means we are continuously looking for ways to improve and innovate, ensuring that our content remains relevant and accessible to all learners and adheres to EAA and WCAG standards. Start preparing now.
There we go. Did you know about the European Accessibility Act? There's a direct question to the audience here. Did you know about the European Accessibility Act? No. Okay, so if you're based in the EU, you will want to know about this. It's something coming into play, as you saw, June 28th this year. I don't think there's actually a huge amount that the teacher needs to do or change. It's actually the publisher that needs to do the changing to make sure that the materials are accessible. So there are things that you certainly need to know about, but don't panic, please. There's nothing that it's not that you now need to change everything and make your teaching meet a new standard. I'm sure what you're doing is great, and your improvements that you're making by attending sessions like this is also perfectly enough. It's the materials that need to change. Anyway, you will learn more about that. I will tell you later. There's one more link I'm going to be sharing with you today. Advancing learning for everyone. Actually, you know what? Oh no, I was going to share with it now. Let's not share it now. I like changing things at the last. I'm not going to change things at the last minute. I like doing that. Anyway, I would like to invite onto the stage Wiktoria Allan.
Hello,
Hi.
everyone. I'm
Hi.
imagining thunderous applause in my mind. That's what I hear when I get on stage.
I can actually hear it around the
What?
world. I can
Amazing.
actually hear it. I know. This festival has just reached a new level.
I don't understand why, like, how hard is it, computer scientists out there? When you hit the clapping emoji, why can't I hear thunderous applause in my head?
Do you know what?
Amazing.
They can do these weird things like when you just move your hands around. Have you done it when you're in Teams or something? You move your hands and it does like balloons or something randomly. They can do that in a completely the wrong moment, but they can't do clapping when you're getting all these emojis.
Come on.
Great. Thank you so much for joining the festival, Vicky. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for, choosing me to close out this whole thing. It's quite an honor. I appreciate it.
I'm glad it's an honor. I'm glad it's an honor. This is a great talk, everyone. You're in for an actual treat here from Vicky. So you've been teaching for over 10 years in ELT. You coordinate English at the Berlin School of Economics and Law.
Yep.
What has been a highlight? Sorry, go. You go.
No, you go.
Me? What has been a highlight of your career so far?
I mean, that's
Apart
the
from
easiest.
apart from this exact
Apart from right
moment.
now? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
You can't choose now.
you ask the really easy questions, huh? You save those for your favorite people.
Yeah.
An absolute highlight. Man, that's really hard. Oh, I'm not going to say this was the highlight, but it was definitely a highlight. The first time I gave a version of this talk was at IATEFL a couple of years ago. For those of you who don't know, that's a big conference for English teachers that happens in the UK. And there was like a line out the door of people who wanted to hear about it. And
Wow.
I don't see it as oh wow, I'm a rock star or whatever. It was just such an amazing moment that people were like, we want to hear about this. We want to learn about this. And that was a very cool moment. And that was when I realized, okay, I need to figure out how to spread the word about this thing, because people want to know and people aren't getting the training that they need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see. I know what you mean by not the rock star, that you were just touched that those people are just so keen to learn.
Yeah.
A bit of rock star. If I had a queue out of IATEFL and had a queue out of the room, I would definitely think I was a rock star. I'm sorry, that's just me, mate, I think.
Oh man, that would be pretty cool, I guess.
All right, Vicky, I'm going to leave you to it. Have a great session. See you in about 30.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Let me start sharing. Okay. So thank you for sticking around. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe good middle of the night, if that's what time it is where you are right now. Thank you so much for joining me. In case you're wondering about my name, I've seen a lot of people from Poland here. I was born in Poland, so dzień dobry to everyone who's joining us from Poland. And I'm living in Berlin, so I'll also say guten Tag or hallo. And that's pretty much where my linguistic abilities end. So apologies, but even if you're not from those places, you are very, very welcome. And thank you for coming to my talk. I want to start by telling you a little story about how I got into this topic. And it was at the height of COVID back in 2020, at the peak of Zoom teaching. I know some of you maybe still teach online. The majority of my teaching is in person now. But back then, everything was on Zoom. And I decided to end one class about 20 minutes early. We were finished. There was nothing else for the students to do. And I was looking forward to a longer lunch break. And everybody left except for one student. And she said, "Do you mind if I stay in the Zoom room?" And I said, "No, but is everything okay?" And she said, yeah, it's fine. It's just, I have a task that I really need to finish. And I work better when there's somebody else working with me. Is that okay? Can I stay? And I said, yeah, of course. You know, I have a task to do as well. So let's do that. We muted our microphones, we left our cameras on, and we worked for about 20 minutes. And I was surprised to find that I was able to finish a task that I had been putting off for weeks. And it didn't take me that long, but I've been putting it off for weeks. So we both managed to get something done. And, you know, I patted myself on the back. I said, good job, teacher. You know, you helped a student today. And then I went and I ate my lunch. But there was something that kept bugging me. I thought to myself, okay, yeah, of course I'm happy to help individual students when they ask for support, but what about those who don't ask for support? What about the rest of the class? What am I doing in my classes to help students with ADHD? So I did what I always do when I have a question like this, and I went to Google. I looked up language learning, language teaching, ADHD, and unfortunately, there were not that many resources out there. And so that's why I decided to do my PhD research on this topic, to find out more. And that's what I'm looking at now. I'm looking at specifically language testing and to see if extended time testing accommodations are actually helpful for people with ADHD. But my ultimate goal throughout all of this is to help my students and to help your students. And so I hope you keep that in mind while you listen to my presentation. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to start with a poll, which you already know from Claire's talk and Boelo's talk, if you were around for that. There'll be 3 questions for you to answer. Then I'll talk a little bit about what equity means, what it means in this context. We'll talk about what ADHD is to give you a better idea if you don't already know. And then, of course, the all-important tips for supporting learners with ADHD. And you'll notice that there is a lot of overlap with the other 2 talks that you heard today. But it doesn't hurt to hear things more than once. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for the Q&A. Can we get the first poll question, please? All right, so you should see it pop up on your screen. Which of the following best describes your understanding of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD? And as you might have noticed, for some reason, the panelists aren't able to see the answers. So my lovely assistant, Will, is going to help me.
I'm here. I'm ready to serve.
Do we have enough to give some answers yet, or are we still waiting for people to answer?
I think we're good.
All right.
So I have a strong understanding of ADHD and its impact on learning is 10%.
Mm-hmm.
I have a basic understanding of ADHD is 38%. I am somewhat familiar with ADHD, but I'd like to learn more is 38%.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very familiar with ADHD. So it's kind of 80-20 mix. Kind of
Okay.
10, 80, 10.
Yep. Yep. It's pretty similar to the first session as well, because I wrote down the numbers for that. All right, thank you. So can we have the second question now?
I think this audience is very well trained now with these polls.
Have you received any formal training or professional development related to teaching students with ADHD?
Okay, so extensive training is staying pretty low at 1%.
What?
1%.
Wow. Okay.
Some training is
Mhm.
24%.
Mm-hmm.
I've done my own research is 28%.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, Vicky, none at all is 48%.
That's a couple of percent higher than the first session. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean it's of course it's disappointing on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's nice to know that I'm on the right path and I'm doing something that will hopefully help people. And the
definitely.
last question, please. How confident are you in your ability to effectively teach students with ADHD?
I feel like an assistant on a game show. Countdown or something.
We got to get you a sparkly vest.
I'll just let it simmer for a bit.
Got it. Trying to keep up with the chat, but it's impossible.
Okay, so very confident is 7%,
Mhm.
6% thereabouts. Somewhat confident, 30%. Not very confident is 48%.
Mm-hmm.
And not at all confident is 15%.
That's weird. Last time it was 30, 48, 15. So it's almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
Very
Wow.
interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Will.
You're welcome.
So hopefully by the end of the session, the confidence, your confidence will have gone up a little bit. And those of you who answered none at all to the training or professional development will be able to change that a little bit and say, you know what, you have had some training. All right, so let's move on. On the next slide, and if you've seen one of my talks before, you've probably seen the picture on the next slide before. I'm going to show you a photo, and I would like you to answer in the chat what you see in the photo and who it is for. Okay, here we go. In the chat, what do you see on the photo and who is it for? Pavement, yes. Earthquake damage, interesting. Pavement for disabled, bikes or wheelchairs, wheelchairs, pedestrian, pavement, low pavement for wheelchairs and bikes, a dipped curb, hey, a crack, pavement for wheelchairs, it's a pavement for wheelchairs, accessibility, for mums with strollers, aha, now we're getting somewhere. Adapted for prams, you can skate, ramps, lowered pavement for us all, very interesting. Wheelchairs, accessible for everybody. A lot of you were seeing the road damage. That wasn't my intention with the photo, but maybe a little bit. Adapted pavement for people with physical problems, wheelchair access, rollerblades, skaters, old people, accessible pavement. Okay, so we can see that maybe it was just a mistake. That's a very interesting comment. So we can see that this was probably initially designed this way with wheelchair users in mind. But from the wide variety of things that you have written in the chat, you can see that it's actually helpful for a large number of people. People with heavy suitcases, delivery people with trolleys, parents with prams, maybe little kids on scooters or bikes. If you've broken your leg and you're on crutches, I don't know, if you are walking in high heels and you broke a heel or something. Honestly, the list is kind of endless. But this is something that I think has been coming up in Claire's talk and in Boelo's talk as well. This idea that if we help the most vulnerable of us, then we inevitably help everybody as well. Okay? It doesn't hurt to help the ones among us who need the most help. And so that's what I want to talk about when I talk about equity. And I have a quote for you. There's an ingrained societal suspicion that intentionally supporting one group hurts another, that equity is a zero-sum game. So a lot of people believe that if we help one group of people, that means another group is being hurt. Zero-sum game is a game where one person wins and one person loses. That is not the case with equity. Equity is not a finite resource. When we help one group, we can also help other groups. And as I said, when we help the most vulnerable, we all benefit. And during this presentation, that's what I want you to keep in mind. I'm going to give you lots of tips, and Claire and Boelo have given you lots of tips that are specifically for autistic learners and dyslexic learners and learners with ADHD. But I also want you to think about, how could these tips help all of my students, right? Later on, for example, I'm going to talk about giving deadline extensions, excuse me, as something that I think is helpful for people with ADHD who may struggle with organization. But deadline extensions, I've had students make use of deadline extensions for all sorts of things. They have a lot of stress at work because a lot of my students work. They had a death in the family. They are sick. Maybe someone they're caring for is sick. It really could be a wide variety of reasons. But by just offering a blanket deadline extension to everyone, hoping that the most vulnerable will use it and will benefit, everybody benefits. So let's talk a little bit about what ADHD is. But before we do, I'd like to remind you that there's no one unifying example of a person with ADHD. If you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. Everybody is very different, okay? Everybody has different strategies, different coping strategies. Everybody deals with their diagnosis differently. Some people choose to disclose it. Some people choose not to disclose it. Some people go to therapy, take medication. Some people don't. Some people choose not to even go out and get an official diagnosis, even though they might be pretty sure that they have ADHD. And everybody has good days and bad days. There are things which might be very, very challenging for somebody one day, and the very next day they're doing that task with ease. So I want you to keep all of those things in mind. And just like Claire mentioned in her talk, this is a disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or at least the name says it's a disorder. I don't support this belief. I also support the neurodiversity perspective, and I think it's just a different way of thinking and living, and perhaps it's the society that's a little bit disordered. But that's a talk for another day. So some of you might know that there are different types of ADHD, and in the medical literature, they are called presentations, not types. There is the inattentive type, inattentive presentation. There's the hyperactive and impulsive presentation, and there's the combined presentation, okay? So let me tell you a little bit more about those. The inattentive presentation is people who have this presentation, they might have difficulty sustaining attention in and organizing tasks and activities. So basically staying focused, paying attention can be difficult. They might not look like they're listening to you even when you're speaking to them directly. They might not follow through on instructions and schoolwork, and they might even get perhaps halfway through a task and then forget what they were doing and get distracted by something else. They might make careless mistakes in their work, not mistakes which show a lack of understanding, but mistakes that show perhaps they were working too quickly. And they might completely avoid or be reluctant to take on tasks which they know are going to take them a long time, or take on tasks which they think are going to take on a long time, but might actually be finished in 5 minutes. The next type is hyperactive or impulsive presentation. And this is what you might think of when you think of ADHD, the stereotype of the naughty schoolboy who can't sit still, leaning back in his chair in the classroom, disruptive. This is a stereotype that I hope will eventually just go away, because it can be quite harmful and it can prevent a lot of people from getting the help that they need. But it's a stereotype for a reason. So the person who has this type of ADHD might leave their seat when they're not really supposed to. And as adults, and I'll talk a little bit about adulthood ADHD in a minute, but as adults, a lot of people have sort of trained themselves to stay seated, but that energy, that hyperactivity doesn't necessarily go away it's more in your head, and it's an inner tension or a restlessness. Your thoughts are unable to settle. Your thoughts are running, and it's very difficult to stay calm and cool. A person with this type of ADHD might talk excessively, blurt out answers before you've even finished asking the question. They might find it difficult to wait their turn when they're talking in a group, and they might interrupt others as well. But of course, I don't just want to focus on the things that people with ADHD struggle with. Let's have a look at some of the strengths that they have as well. So unfortunately, the strengths in ADHD are hugely under-researched. There really isn't that much out there yet, but it looks promising. There's been a lot of studies done in the past 2 or 3 years, and so I hope that those keep coming. But the one study that I'm quoting here, Shippers and team, they found that hyperfocus, sensitivity, and flexibility were some of the strengths that they found in groups of people with ADHD. Hyperfocus, for those of you who don't know, is a period of intense focus, and it can last a really long time. And it can be so intense that people who are in a period of hyperfocus forget to eat, forget to drink, put off going to the bathroom until the last possible minute. They are hyper-focused, as the word sounds. And perhaps one of the things that we can do as teachers is to sort of tap into that hyper-focus and find what it is that students are interested in and play to their strengths. Another thing, thing that was considered a strength for students with ADHD is sensitivity. And in this case, it's sensitivity to people's feelings and emotions. So a person with ADHD might be more aware of very subtle changes in, let's say, their speaking partner's face or demeanor, and they might more quickly pick up on, let's say, a shift in emotion, a person being in a bad mood, perhaps, than neurotypical people. And the last one that was found in the study is flexibility, and this is not physical flexibility necessarily, but sort of social flexibility, psychological flexibility, being able to change plans at the last minute, spontaneity, flexible ways of thinking, adaptation, those sorts of things. So those are the strengths. And now to give you some facts and figures before I move on to the tips. You will see lots of different numbers when it comes to how many people have ADHD, and it's difficult to pin down. The study that I'm using, which is a little over 10 years old, says that ADHD affects 5 to 7% of children, and it's highly inheritable. What does that mean? That means that 70% of the ADHD that is out there in the world can be explained by a person's parents. So that means one of their parents has it, basically. There are some other causes. I think like childhood trauma is being explored as a potential cause, but mostly it's genetic, highly inheritable. So if one person has it in a family, there's a high chance that other people have it also. And a more recent study said that that number is as high as 9.4% in the US. This doesn't necessarily mean that there are more children with ADHD in the US. I just feel like in the US it's been destigmatized. It's become a lot more normalized, and people no longer feel ashamed speaking about it, talking to parents about it, talking to doctors about it, and getting the support for their children that they need. Boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed as girls. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that boys have it more than girls. But if you think back to the 2 different presentations, and imagine you have a quiet, inattentive girl who likes to stare out the window, and a not so quiet, hyperactive boy who can be disruptive in the classroom, which student do you think is going to get the teacher's attention, and which student do you think the teacher is going to want to fix, for lack of a better word? It's probably going to be the student that is a little bit more disruptive, who will, you know, get a note home to the parents and say, hey, I think maybe we need to talk about your son, but nobody's going to notice the girl who forgets her homework a couple of times and kind of just coasts through, basically, unfortunately, because there's this pervasive stereotype. Also, there are some groups that are typically underdiagnosed. Again, from this US study in 2021 showed that Asian, Hispanic, and Black children are less likely to be diagnosed. The study didn't necessarily say why, but again, it could be issues of stigma. Yeah, it's very difficult to say because there are high levels of stigma all around the world surrounding mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD, like autism, dyslexia, and so on and so forth. What does it look like for adults? Yes, adults can have ADHD. There is a mistaken belief that ADHD does not persist into adulthood, but it does. The numbers here are that it affects 2.5% to 5% of adults. However, in this study, Ginsberg and his team go on to say that 80% of adults who have ADHD don't have a diagnosis. 80%. So try to keep that in mind. That might mean that they chose not to get a diagnosis or they simply do not know that they have ADHD. So when you see these low numbers, keep in mind that there's a very high number of undiagnosed adults out there. And as we already heard in the previous talk, there is a frequent co-occurrence of ADHD with a lot of other disorders. So-called pure ADHD, where a person only has ADHD, is actually very rare. That only occurs in 5% of cases. It is much more likely for a person to have one of these other disorders, so-called disorders. I hope you know every time I say disorder, I'm saying it with air quotes. So frequent co-occurrence with autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, which has to do with counting and arithmetic, math, dyspraxia, which is a developmental coordination disorder, depression, dysthymia, which is a mood disorder, anxiety disorder, substance use disorder, bipolar disorder, and personality disorder. I'm saying this to draw your attention to the fact that the student, I mean, for, you know, going back to the previous talk, the student who you think is just lazy could actually be struggling with a lot of these things. And from what I've heard from speaking to people with ADHD, many of them feel a very deep feeling of shame because they do not want to forget deadlines. They do not want to forget to sign up for things. They don't want to forget to renew their passport and realize it the day before a flight. That is very hard for them and very shameful and embarrassing. And so they don't need our judgment. They need our support and our empathy. And I hope that that's something that I can get across to you today. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about what an inclusive classroom might look like, and I'll give you some specific tips. Maybe you can put in the chat what you believe an inclusive classroom would look like before I read you a quote from some of my favorite authors. So go ahead and put in the chat, what do you think an inclusive classroom would look like? What makes a classroom inclusive? Considering the different ways students can process information, multisensory teaching, very interesting. Activities that target different intelligences, everyone feels good, pair work, collaborative work, and now it's going too fast for me to read. Everyone can learn, cater for everyone in the group, a place where everybody's accepted and respected, engagement of all students, collaboration, work in pairs, it must be tolerant, flexible, open to changes, place where everyone belongs and feels successful, comfortable environment for everyone, differentiated teaching, where you teach neurotypical students to understand, respect, and include the other ones and cater for every need. I really like that. I think if we can build a classroom where we teach all of our students to be allies for each other and to advocate for each other so that the students who need the support don't always have to ask for it. I think that's a wonderful place. A lot of collaborative learning I'm seeing, tailoring, making sure students don't have to sit all the time but can move while learning. Yeah, that's one of my tips. Did you come to the earlier presentation? Thank you for your ideas. Keep them coming. Yes. So here's a quote from one of my favorite books, and I know people were asking for books in the last session. I don't know if you'll be able to see it with my filter. It's Teaching Languages to Students with Specific Learning Differences. This is the second edition of the book. It's by Judith Karmosh, who's my PhD supervisor, and Anne Margaret Smith. It's a really great resource. It's made for teachers, but it's research backed, which I think makes it really powerful and talks about all aspects of teaching languages. And here's what they say about the inclusive classroom. In its purest form, inclusion calls for a radical restructuring of the education system so that it will be equipped to accommodate all learners. And as such, it looks beyond the integration of disabled learners in the mainstream to a vision of participation and engagement in education which is accessible to all. The evidence suggests that accessible and diverse classrooms are beneficial to all learners. So rather than the previous thinking of taking students who have additional needs or specific learning differences and putting them in a separate classroom, including everybody in the same classroom, is the way to go, according to these experts at least. So how can we actually do that? I'm going to show you some tips. Actually, it's a lot of tips. So let me tell you how I'm going to break it down. The first section is going to include some changes that you can make quickly and without too much effort on your part, hopefully. The second section will have some changes that might require a little bit of planning on your part. And the final tips might even require administrative approval, depending on your institution and your teaching context. But what I want you to keep in mind, there are two things I want you to keep in mind. The first thing is that you will not be able to implement all of these changes on Monday, okay? And if you try, you will get overwhelmed and you will get burnt out. You cannot pour from an empty cup, okay? It's great that you want to help, but don't try and do everything at once because it will become too hard and you will give up. Instead, make small, sustainable, incremental changes, and that's how your students will benefit. Your students won't benefit if you're stressing yourself out to make everything perfect for everyone from day one. And the second thing I wanted to remind you of was, while you're listening to these tips, think about how they could be helpful for your neurotypical students as well, because we're talking about including everyone. So here we go. Some quick changes that you could make. Allow your students to sit where they would like to sit. Many of your students, especially if they're neurodivergent, will know where they learn best in the classroom. They'll know if it's better for them to sit at the front, right up close to the teacher. That's where they get least distracted. Or they'll know if they need to sit by the window because they know that every 15, 20 minutes or so, they need to switch off their brain for a minute, look out the window, have a little break, and then come back to where they are with everybody else. I saw someone else mention this one as well, free to move. If you've built this inclusive classroom where everybody else is aware that some people feel a very strong urge to move their body at sometimes inopportune moments, then hopefully it's not too distracting if those people get up and move. But if it is a distraction, you could ask those students if they would like to sit at the back of the classroom so that when they stand up and stretch and move or whatever, it's not distracting to most of the class sitting in front of them. And I know that it really depends on your context and the age level that you teach. I teach at the university level, so my students have a lot of freedom. They can get up whenever they want to, but I know that that's not always an option. Another thing you can do is offer frequent breaks. So going back to the Zoom teaching I was telling you about, the sort of standard for teaching 4 teaching hours would be 90 minutes, a 15-minute break followed by 90 minutes. So what I did instead, because I thought people didn't want to sit in front of their computers for 90 minutes straight, was to break it up into 3 one-hour blocks with shorter breaks in between. And the students responded really well to that. And you could make those blocks even shorter. This one could perhaps require administrative approval, but I think in most contexts, you're allowed to say when there's a mini break. I know a lot of people have started incorporating so-called brain breaks into their teaching, and I know that those can be pretty effective. Boelo already talked about the importance of giving good instructions. When I give instructions to my students, I typically try and get their attention, make sure that they're, at least it looks like they're listening to me. Then I will give them the instructions orally, and some of them will get started working, and I will remind them, don't worry, I'm about to put them on the board, and then I will write the instructions on the board so they know exactly what they're doing. I like to also write down the times. So as teachers, I know we love to say, okay, you've got 5 minutes for this task, or you've got 15 minutes for this task. I don't know about you, but many times I've lost track of the 15 minutes myself, and I don't remember when we started the 15 minutes. So what I do now is I say, you've got 15 minutes for this task. I look at my watch, it's 11 o'clock, and I write down 11 to 11:15 on the board so that I don't have to keep track of the time and the students don't have to keep track of the time. They can just focus on the task. So taking away a little bit of their mental load and allowing them to focus on the task at hand rather than these little administrative sort of timing things. Excuse me. Also to do with instructions, try not to jump into things too quickly after giving people instructions. Give them time to process what you've said. You might need to say it again. You know, we've all been there where we've missed something that was said in a classroom, and suddenly you notice, oh no, the teacher has stopped talking. Did she ask a question? What was the question? I didn't hear it. So it can be helpful to just ask things multiple times or wait. When you're writing those instructions on the board, only write the instructions on the board. Don't start talking about the homework that's due next week or another task that the students have to do. People cannot read and listen to two different things at the same time. I'm guilty of this. I'm sure we're all guilty of this, but it's something to think about next time you're standing at the board. Don't speak, just write what you need to write. Boelo already mentioned breaking tasks into smaller chunks. It can make it much more manageable and less daunting. We talked about how people with ADHD, some people with ADHD might find it difficult to start a really big task, but if they see a much smaller task broken into smaller chunks, it might be much more manageable for them. And I know Boelo talked about adding images and things like that. But something to think about is that we have to balance stimulation and distraction. So for some learners, they would really love to have bright colors, beautiful pictures. That is going to make them want to read the article because it looks interesting and it looks like it's going to be fun. Other learners will be distracted by the colors and the photos. So if you're able to, maybe if you work with digital materials, offer a fancy, flashy version and a more pared down, very bare bones version. By the way, if you hear noise in the background, that's my son running up and down the hallway. It's something he likes to do. He calls it the zoomies. Okay, he's okay. He's just getting his energy out. So what are some things that might need a little bit more planning? Well, making group work optional. I know Claire talked about this a little bit in her talk. I know it's a language class. I know we would love for our students to talk. Trust me, the students will talk to each other and work together when they feel comfortable and when they feel safe. There are some days where they just don't want to talk to people and they still get the work done. So think about when you can make group work optional and when it absolutely has to be group work or pair work. I'll give them the chance, this goes into Universal Design for Learning a little bit, UDL, give them the chance to, if it doesn't have to be a written assignment, if they just need to show you that they learned something, can they record a narrated PowerPoint? Can they send you an MP3 voice note that you can grade instead? Think about different ways that they can present to you that they've learned something. And this goes for assessments as well. I don't know what learning platform you use. We use Moodle at my institution. I know there's also Blackboard. They have a highlight feature where you can highlight the current week, which can be really helpful for people who might be overwhelmed by a ton of text on a Moodle course. It's a small thing, but it can make a big difference. It's important to give your courses and your classes a clear structure and a routine so that students know what's coming and they don't have to waste precious processing power thinking about what's coming next, because they already know and they can use it for other things. I know we're language teachers, but you might want to offer guidance on note-taking, time management, organization. Speaking of time management, I'm almost finished. Sorry, Will. And just giving them little tips on things that help you and showing them different ways to take notes. I love doing this, you know, I really force my students to brainstorm. And at the end of it, when they're doing a listening task, and at the end of them, some of them say, I hated that. That was not my way of taking notes. And I said, excellent, you learned something about yourself today. Let's see if the next way of taking notes is better for you. And you show them a different way, a variety of different ways of doing this, and maybe one of them will resonate with them. Tap into that hyper focus. Let them, as much as you can, give them freedom on topic choice. Let them write about what they want to write about. And I say it every time we're doing presentations or essays or whatever. Choose something you're interested in, because only that will keep you going, right? I'm clearly very interested in my PhD topic because that has to keep me going over 5 years. It's a part-time PhD. You have to be dedicated to keep going and interested. And of course, know who you can send students to for further assistance if they need testing accommodations or special educational plans, individual educational plans, those sorts of things. Finally, things which might need administrative approval. It's an easy change for me. I'm very flexible on punctuality with my students. I don't see it as a personal failing that a student is late. I say, you know, just come in quietly, sit down, get started. But they're adults, and I know that's very different to when you teach children. But perhaps reassess your ideas about punctuality and what. I always offer deadline extensions, no questions asked, to all of my students. I don't require a medical certificate or anything. I just let them have the extra time. And we did have a very cute puppy in one of my classes once. It was a service dog in training. We weren't allowed to pet him, but he was very cute. His name was, I think, Zigzag, if I remember correctly. Adorable. But keep this in mind that this is something that might be helpful for some students. A separate room for assessments, if that's possible. Again, that's typically something that you would talk about with your administration because you need an extra supervisor for that. And this one might be a little bit controversial. When my students are doing longer stretches of quiet work, so they're writing or reading, or maybe even sometimes during assessments, I allow them to use earplugs to block out all the extra noise, or even put in their headphones and listen to music. No, I'm not afraid of cheating, but you know your students best. And some of my students, the look on their faces when they find out they can block out the noise with their favorite music, it's worth it. And I like to think that they can perform better when they feel more comfortable. Ooh, okay. Most of all, I encourage you to be open, be patient, be kind, and ask questions. If you don't know, just ask questions. On the next slide are my references. Feel free to screenshot them. Some of them are papers, which you may or may not have access to. Sorry about that. On the next slide, I'm going to show you some further reading resources, which are more aimed at teachers and practitioners, especially the last two texts by Anne Margaret Smith. I think they're really wonderful resources, and I encourage you to check them out. So go ahead and take a screenshot of that if you're interested. Thank you so much for listening and for sticking around all the way through the third talk. Here's how you can keep in touch with me. Welcome back, Will.
Thank you very, very much, Vicky. Absolutely brilliant. Look at all those little emojis popping up.
I wonder what the thumbs up would sound like. Yeah.
Brilliant talk. What a great talk.
Thank you.
We also had a little demonstration of it behind you as well.
What?
Your son burning off some steam.
I was like so confused. Oh my goodness. Yeah. You know, he needed to move, and apologies to my neighbors because it's pretty loud.
No
But it
worries.
is what it is.
Okay, couple of questions if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. Hit me.
So just because Jitka has put a question in that I'm going to read out to you. It's a bit of a long one, but I think it's a great question. What should I do with a student who doesn't want to work with others in pairs or groups, even if the students behave nicely to them and try to pair and they're being caring and tactful and empathetic? He just prefers to work alone, but the language is also about interaction. But learning language is also about interaction and communication, which can partly be done in writing, but speaking is also really important. I believe students should learn to cooperate in teams. This student should learn that. Should they keep pushing him slightly out of his comfort zone, or isn't that dangerous? What to do?
It's a good question. I think you really have to think about what the end goals are. I mean, my first thought would be talk to the student and get curious and find out why it is that they don't want to work with other people.
Okay.
Because it could be something that's unexpected. And obviously talk about the benefits of interaction in language learning. It's what it's all about when it comes to speaking, especially in communication with others. But I don't think you can push someone, and you're not gonna create an environment in which that student feels safe and ready and vulnerable enough to learn, because that's what learning a foreign language is, to be vulnerable, right? You're speaking like a young kid in those A1, A2 classes where you're still building up your language, and that can be really scary for a lot of people.
It's not risk free for everyone else. No.
I mean, I've had students who talk about how they have social anxiety and they don't like to work with other people in groups, and I give them time, and by the second or third week they do choose to work with other people because they've gotten to know people in the class in a low pressure sort of way. So maybe you could think of a task where it's not intense one-on-one time, but maybe one of those tasks where you have people moving around the room, sort of find somebody who, one of those tasks. And where it's not really intense 10 minutes of working together. It's just, have you ever been to Australia? Okay, yes. And then they move on, talk to the next person. Maybe that could be a sort of gateway task into getting them more as part of the group, and then have them also write their own questions so that they can find out, oh, maybe someone else plays, Minecraft or Roblox or whatever it is that kids are playing these days. And then they might find a connection to someone and be able to work with that person.
Yeah, right. So sort of find someone that they can latch onto a little bit.
Because I always let my students work with people that they want to work with. And sometimes it becomes problematic because I know friends sometimes it just doesn't work. And then I give them a little talk about how maybe it's not the best decision to work with your friends if your friends are distracting you, but it's your choice because you're adults in my case. But letting them choose who they want to work with, that can be really great too.
Do you think it would work? So we've had quite a few various sort of talks around task-based learning and project-based learning. And they often give the advice to give learners a role during that process and to rotate those roles. Do you think that would help in this instance? Do you think there's a particular role in that process that someone with ADHD might really sort of thrive in?
Interesting.
More than your average person.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, in our speaking exams, we do these, I teach business English, and we do these meeting simulations, and we always give roles. And some people have said, why do you give roles? Why don't you let students give their own opinions? And I say, well, if they have a role to play and somebody disagrees with their opinion, they're not attacking the person, they're attacking the role. The person can say, I don't actually believe this. This is my role. So actually, I love using roles in those types of situations because it allows the student to say, this isn't necessarily me. So when you disagree with my opinion, you're not disagreeing with me as a person. You're just disagreeing with the role the teacher told me to take. But as for whether there's a good role for a person with ADHD, I'm not sure. I think the best role play will be something that the person is interested in, something maybe even that they've come up with themselves. Maybe you could Yeah, so maybe you could have the class vote on topics, or you could sort of come up with a general enough topic and then have the student write their own role so they can sort of create this persona. I know Claire talked about her teacher persona. Maybe they could create this character that they want to play, and perhaps try that out. It's an interesting question. It's
Yeah,
not
it is an
something.
interesting question. Yeah, food for thought. Definitely. Thanks, Vicky. All right, one more if you don't mind. We had this in a different session in the morning, but sort of same question to you. I'm a teacher with ADHD. Can you give me some tips, please?
That's out of my scope of expertise. However, there are a bunch of people on LinkedIn talking about that.
I'll get them.
Oh, there were some really good talks. I know that Eltonics, I don't know if you've heard of them. That group.
Have we heard of them? We work with them all. They're at the last festival.
Amazing.
I love those two. They are.
So I know they definitely hosted some talks on LinkedIn. I don't know if you can find them. And then there is a person that one of my colleagues is working with. His name is Mark Jones. I'm going to see if I can find a paper that I was just reading. I don't know, but I know his name is Mark Jones, and he works on, he researches teachers with ADHD. So that's what I'm trying to find right now.
I'm going to beat you to it.
At the TU document.
We've got a UX designer at Tesco.
I'm not sure that's the one. Mark.
I think it's a different person.
It's Mark with a C. Sorry, Mark with a C. That might narrow things down a little bit.
Yeah, I got him. Yeah.
And
based in Tokyo.
Oh, yeah, is that what it is? Here's one of the papers. Am I allowed to share a link to a paper?
Yeah, please do. Share.
The link was dead, unfortunately, but I can share the citation, and then maybe people can find it themselves.
I've just linked it to Mark.
Okay, good. It's What About Teachers? A Duo Ethnographic Exploration of ADHD in ELT. And basically to say, if you're out there and you're teaching English and you have ADHD, you're not alone. I think the message of fill your own cup before trying to help your students is even stronger here. Or what do they say on the airplanes? Put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. That goes double for any neurodivergent teachers. Someone wrote, "Isn't ADHD a prerequisite to become a teacher?" Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I passed my test when I started teaching. Did you all not? Yeah, so
Awesome.
I'm not really able to help there. I think a lot of this can apply, finding structures that work for you, finding routines that work for you, finding really good ways to rest and to rest your mind as well. So not only resting your mind, but finding out what recharges your mind. It's really about learning a lot about yourself.
Okay. Vicky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for closing the festival. Thank you very much.
It's an honor. Thanks everyone for joining and for all of your great questions. And I definitely saw some names that I know in the group, so I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you for coming and supporting me and listening to this talk, even if you've heard it before.
There are some people who've come for a second time. Isn't that great?
Incredible.
What better pat on the back do you need?
I know, right?
Talk twice in a day, please.
Yeah. Now I just need to get a little caffeine kick so I can stay up for the last session.
Yeah, you've got to time that perfectly.
Or sneak in a nap, maybe?
Oh, great idea. I wish I could, but we both got children. I don't think that's really possible.
Oh, yeah, true.
Just have
with him running up and down the hallway.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Will.
Cheers, Vicky. See you later. Bye.
Yep, bye.
Thanks. All righty. Okie dokie. I say those things all the time. Okay. We're almost there. We're almost at the end of the 5th annual Global Teachers Festival. And before we get there, I know, Maria. Amazing, huh? Isn't that awesome? Let me bring it. I want to make sure I can see the chat. Got to organize my screen a little bit. Great. Wasn't that amazing? What a festival. What a day. What a day to finish it on. That was huge. 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours of neurodiversity. I hope that has filled you up for today on learning about neurodiversity and intrigued you to learn more. Before we go, as always, we've got our gift, and this is our gift to you today. We've created an entire environment for you. It's not just a gift. This is an environment on our website, not actually a physical environment. That would be strange. This is advancing learning for everyone. At Macmillan Education, we believe everyone should have the same opportunities, as we've heard throughout our talks today. Everyone should have the same opportunities and feel included on their learning journey, regardless of their context, regardless of their background, regardless of anything. Everyone needs to have the same experience, not the same experience. They have the same rights to their learning journey as everybody else. That's why we've created this environment, Advancing Learning for Everyone. It's a program of tools, of products, and of resources that help teachers foster inclusive and accessible learning environments while nurturing empathy in the classroom. This is partly in response to the European Accessibility Act coming into play in June this year. So from guidance from that act and the implications for teachers and institutions, there are resources in here to support students with neurodiversity. There's a library of materials aimed at fostering empathetic classrooms. It's just packed with resources. One particular piece, it will be more packed. It's an evolutionary page. It will just evolve over time. This is not its final stage. This is where it's starting. That's very important for you to realize that. This is a page to bookmark if it's something you'd like to continue learning about. What you will see on that page is a white paper, which includes contributions from Claire, Boelo, and Vicky. They have all contributed to this white paper, among others, the Inclusive Learning and Teaching white paper. So you can go in there and read more about it if you're interested in what you heard from them today. They've also contributed to this. That's your gift for today, is the Advancing Learning for Everyone page, and within it for now is the white paper. Please go and take a look. We've created it just for you for today. We will be sharing it widely after this, but this is its launch. This is where it starts. Please do go and take a look at that. You're very welcome, everyone. You're very, very welcome. And I love the diverse way that people spell Macmillan as well. I've seen it all. I've seen every single way that people say Macmillan, and I love it. Just in the chat box, please think of the most innovative way to spell Macmillan. I'm going to go like that. Old Macmillan had a farm. Great. I love that, Maria. Macmillan. M&M. Love it. Keep it going. Love it. That's a great way to end. Macmillan. I love that. Very cool. Keep it coming. Very nice. Okay. If you didn't know it already, if we haven't put it under your nose enough times, here's one last time. If you haven't bookmarked this yet, on wherever you listen to podcasts, if you're a podcast listener, please do it now. So you've got the website somewhere on the screen here. Go to it, and it's got a load of links to Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, basically, and Podcast FM, I think, is on there. There's basically lots of the main, or all of the main podcast platforms if you want to bookmark this for later. We talk about all things ELT, me and Hazza, Mr. Harry Waters. We speak to lots of experts in the ELT industry about lots of different stuff. But it's a pretty chilled atmosphere, pretty chilled vibe. We keep it pretty friendly, like sort of chatting around a staff room kind of conversation, chit chat, but with someone who really knows what they're talking about around the table. Bookmark it now. Go, go, go. It's on Spotify, Vanessa. Yes, it's on Spotify. Go and give it a try. I've already taken you through this white paper. It's also in your goodie bag. You can get it straight from there as well. Your goodie bag will be bolstered within the next week with the recordings and slides from today, with some more training content as well. But that'll be within a week with your certificate, which is going to come along with your full, complete goodie bag. I've got a request for you. This is the one request please, 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 this is the one thing I ask you to do. We love the festival. It takes up a third of my year, at least maybe half of my professional year is about this Global Teachers Festival. I absolutely adore it. I've been here since the beginning, and I absolutely love running this festival with everyone at Macmillan and for everyone that's watching it, along with all of our speakers. And in order to make this festival better every year, we need to hear from you. Otherwise, we're sort of a little bit in the dark. We need to know that we're doing it the right way, that we are approaching the right topics. That's really the stuff that you need to hear about, the stuff that you really want to learn about. And it's these surveys that really help us to get that information from you. I don't think we're asking for data. It's not that kind of survey. You don't need to fill out loads of forms. It's 6 questions. I believe it's anonymous, so you don't need to put your data in again. It's just, we need that information. We need to know the sort of things that you'd like to learn about. How do you like to learn? What format of teacher training do you prefer? Just things like that. It's really basic stuff. There's only 6 questions and it should take you about 1 minute. So please click that and then answer those questions. You could have actually done it while I was rabbiting on about the survey, to be completely honest with you. It's that quick. So please do fill out that survey. And let's just hear it. Last little swell. We're going to do a waterfall. If anyone was here on day 2, don't answer this yet. Don't answer the question yet. If anyone was here on day 2 with me and Harry Waters, Laura Wilkes, Paula Ostad was there as well. But Harry did this thing called a waterfall. I ask you a question. You type the answer, but you don't press enter yet. So type your answer to this. Type your answer to this. One talk that stands out to you, or one subject, or a day, or a speaker, if you like. Anything. One thing that you can put in a quick text on the chat, in the chat box, that stands out to you. And when I say go, I want to see the biggest waterfall I've ever seen in my whole life go through this chat box. I'd like to say, are you ready? But you can't answer that because that would involve deleting your answer and everything. Anyway, go. Oh, here we go. Here we go. I love it. That is so fun. Crystal, David and Ben, Chia, Vicky, Victoria, Anna Parr, David and Ben. They really have stood out, haven't they? Game-based learning, diversity, characters, ADHD, critical thinking, mindfulness. Sarah. Day 10, diversity, Anna and Crystal. Love the combo there. Day 10, good stuff. Wow, I'm still going. Dyslexic learners, ADHD, mindfulness. Day 3, day 8, thank you. Wow, amazing. What a response. The whole festival was amazing. I completely agree. What an amazing festival it's been. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you again in a year. Have a great year, everyone. We'll see you soon with some more updates about the academic program. We've got lots more things going on throughout the year. But for the festival, I'll see you in a year's time. So long, everyone. Bye.